I think people just have different reasons for wanting to be in games, and some of those reasons are fine. Like for some people, it's just enough to make a cool game that's theirs that does exactly what they want to do with like new characters or something, right? Or a new art style, or not even new, but like this is my art style that I want. And that's not bad. Like obviously, if you look at some much older genre like literature, right? Most literature is not experimental literature that's trying to innovate in the form. It's just stories that people wanted to tell, right? And so that's probably mostly what's happening in games now, is these are just games that people wanted to make, and they're not really pushing the medium. I've always been about pushing the medium because I think there's a long way to push it still. I think we don't really understand that well what games could really be. And so with every one of my projects, I'm trying to push on some boundary to do something new. But there's plenty of reasons to make games. Like, look, if you make a game that somebody really likes and they get a lot of enjoyment about out of playing, who cares if it's like innovative or whatever, right? I mean, you made a good experience for somebody, and that's cool. That's like, we have to not forget that that's totally fine. But also, though, I think if we don't have this inflow of creativity coming in, we're really missing something, you know?
It ties into the subject of like, I met at the conference a developer who said that he should have done the better thing, like Stardew Valley, and stick with the game he made and try to create, like, because it was successful, like, try to create sort of community around it, updated DLC patches and things like that, instead of just starting a new game that was a long shot and didn't pan out. And there's a lot of games now that try to be sort of like not even like a franchise, but like a community that like grows. What do you think
Yeah.
about this like game development style?
I mean, I think it's fine. It obviously works for some people, but if you're a developer and you think, oh, I did this and I should have done this other thing, you're assuming that you know how the other thing would have gone. Maybe you would try to build a community. And because everybody's trying to build communities now, there's more communities than there is demand for communities. And so it's very hard to build a community now, probably. And so maybe it would have gone as bad or worse, except you wouldn't have even had a new game. You would have only had your old game, right? So it's very hard to know what is really the best thing to do or how things will go. So far, since I did Braid, which was I was in the games industry for a while before that, but that was like the first thing in like what I've been doing since then of these kind of art games. I've always been working on single player puzzle games, and that's just a certain kind of thing that is not very conducive to community building, right? Like the kind of game that you have a community around is something like Stardew Valley or like Terraria, Terraria or something, um, where there's just a lot of replayability, and a lot of like, oh, this can be my hobby for a really long time, which is hard to be true for a puzzle game that's like short and then you finish it. Although who knows, maybe this new game is so long that someone can play it for like 2 years, uh, and it'll be their fun thing. Um, but yeah, like that strategy, if you want to call it a strategy, works better on some games and worse on some other games, right? If you have a multiplayer game, it's much easier to have a community, right? Because people are online to begin with to play it. However, most multiplayer games are kind of just clones of each other now, even more so than single player games. And so that's really weird. Uh, so then it can be harder to differentiate if you're just a clone of, like, so one of these trends is, so because we're getting worse at making games, because games are so complicated, they take so long. Things that are not very easy, like auto battlers, just take so long. So like there was this big PUBG thing when PUBG came out, and then you had all these battle royales trying to follow. And Fortnite followed it really fast, but there were other ones that took longer. But then even not that long after that, you had like Escape from Tarkov, which has become the genre we now know of as extraction shooter, right? And there were some people trying to clone it right away, but they didn't get very far. And it took until 2024 for like, or maybe 2023 for legitimate extraction shooter competition to start entering. And Escape from Tarkov showed up on the, I don't remember what year, 2019, 2018, something like that. It took like years and years for people to try to clone this game. And none of the clones have been like as successful that I've seen. They've all just sort of started out and then fizzled. And that just goes to show that like this whole dynamic is complicated and difficult. And it's, even if you have this ready-made community of like the Escape from Tarkov community, and you're making a game like one of these games, which I just saw a streamer play for a little bit. I think it's not even out yet. I think it's still in beta, is like this game Delta Force. I think that's in closed beta or something. I don't know. You can fact check this at the end. But it doesn't seem very successful to me. Like nobody's really talking about it. Maybe that's because it's in closed beta, or maybe that's because it just totally hasn't succeeded, right? And so even when you think you can hook into an existing community, sometimes it's just really difficult to do. On the other hand, so Jason Rohrer, who's one of the guys, who's another independent game developer who's actually doing experimental things, he made a game some years ago called 1 Hour, 1 Life, where it's a very lo-fi game. It's just 2D. It's networked, but it's 2D, and you just walk around, kind of like Don't Starve or something like that, but lower budget. But it was very ambitious in that the idea is you log into the game, you only live for 1 hour, and then your character dies, but you and all the other players have to somehow build a civilization. And there's like a really big tech tree starting with, you know, sticks and stones and ending with like computers and spaceships, and you have to do that whole tech tree when your characters die in an hour, right? And
when was it released?
a long time ago. I don't remember what year. Let's look up 1 Hour, 1 Life release date. A long time ago.
Do you know whether they
2018.
they achieved computers?
In the early days, the whole tech tree hadn't been built out, and that's when I was following the game. So I'm not sure how that has gone, but it was a very successful game for him, and it had a community of people who were super into this game. Part of that is because it was so different from anything else. Like that description that I just gave, I'm not aware of any other game trying to be anything close to that. I mean, there's a couple of games that are vaguely in the same dimension, but there's nothing that's really that game. So that was one way that maybe you get a community, is with uniqueness, right? Or whatever. But can you just walk up with a generic game and have it succeed? Or if it doesn't succeed, build a community and have that succeed? I mean, maybe, because it's very unpredictable business, but I would say that that's the low probability of success route.
Okay.